Hey everybody, good afternoon and welcome to Electricity Canada's conversation series. Electricity Canada is the national voice for sustainable electricity for its members and the customers they serve. My name is Farhan Mirza and I'm pleased to be your host for today's session. I would first like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am broadcasting you from today is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. I'd also like to recognize Canada as the land of the First Peoples, Inuit and Métis. I would like to pay homage to the Indigenous peoples past, present, and future that continue to work, educate, and contribute to the strength of our country. I'd like to recognize that the land is shared through historic treaties, developed through contemporary treaties, and one that continues to be unceded territory. The conversation series features presentations from our Electricity Canada's corporate partners, and the series will highlight a variety of Canadian and international solutions to current and future challenges faced by our industry. Working with our partners, these webinars have been developed to be of specific interest to those working in the electric utility space, from generation through to the customer. For a list of upcoming sessions, please check out the events section on our website at electricity.ca. Before we get going today, our session today is scheduled to go from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Questions can be asked, and in fact, we encourage you to do so by typing them into the Q&A function on your screen at the bottom, and we will ask them as time permits at the end of the session. And finally, keep an eye out on our future webinars through our monthly newsletter, Current Affairs, which goes out to roughly 6,000 subscribers. So let's get going on today's session. We'd like to welcome our partners, PowerPlan, who will be talking to us about the ERP best practices from a CFO's perspective. Today is the first of a two-part panel discussion examining the best practices and challenges experienced by financial leaders during ERP transformations. Topics for these sessions could include brownfield versus greenfield implementations. What do finance leaders need to get right in platform-led finance transformations? What are some of the logistical paths to implementations, and more? So today's session, we'd like to welcome our hosts, Richard Pickering from PowerPlan and James Major from PowerPlan. James and Richard, welcome. Our guests for today's session are from our partners, Francis Higgins and Marino Fremis from Accenture, Tara Schultz from Deloitte, and Luke O'Regan from Capgemini. Welcome everybody to the conversation series. And Francis, I will pass the webinar over to you to introduce our panelists a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure seeing you, everybody. Francis Higgins at Accenture. I've spent 20 years helping finance organizations get to modern, elevate their processes, their reporting capabilities, and their op model. I've worked mainly with utilities and oil and gas clients in US and Canada, and I'll be pleased to share some perspective today. With me from Accenture is my colleague, Marino Fremis. Marino.
Hey everyone, my name faces on the screen on the page there, but I'm the one waving my hair on the screen. Working very closely with Francis. Recently joined Accenture, but over 20 years of ERP-based transformations in this space. And before that, I spent 5+ years in industry on the other side of the table before I got into consulting. Tara, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tara Schultz. I've been in the industry now for 20 years, and I mainly focus on regulated utilities, but more specifically being their audit leader. And while I haven't implemented new systems, I'm very much been a user and seen how they are used by the finance department. And there's often a lot of interaction between the two. So not only from the beginning all the way to end, and then and we hope to further that conversation today. On to you, Luke.
Hi, everyone. My name's Luke O'Regan. I'm responsible for Capgemini's utilities business across Canada, and I've had the pleasure of working on SAP implementations for just over 3 decades now. Excited to share my perspective.
And I'm James Major. I lead our industry strategy and advisory practice from PowerPlan, and like many of you on the phone today, I actually come from utility. Prior to moving out east, I spent almost a decade at ENMAX in Calgary.
Well, thank you, panelists. Thanks for Electricity Canada for hosting our event today. Now, I'm sure many of you who have joined today know about the companies that our panelists are from, but I'm really hoping that I can quickly tell you a little bit about PowerPlan and who we are. Well, I'm Richard Pickering, and I'm based in Whitby, Ontario. And actually, as a matter of fact, I'm around the corner from our friends over at Alexicon. I'd also like to introduce my other industry veterans from across Canada, So PowerPlan team, could I ask you please turn on your cameras and smile and wave to the audience. So my colleagues today are joining us from coast to coast. I have some crew in from BC, Alberta, and of course here in Ontario. So hi Maria, Corey, Lorena, Jamie, Bonnie, and Mike. Thanks again, team, for joining us. Now, a little bit about PowerPlan. We just recently celebrated our 30th year anniversary and are proud to serve more than 200 plus clients, including 90% of the investor-owned utilities in North America. PowerPlan began with a simple realization. The more fixed assets that an organization has, the more challenging it is to manage them financially and strategically understand how compliance requirements impact the treatment of then of each asset. So our industry-leading solution bridges the language and information gap, aligning and transforming data between operations and finance and their primary systems, allowing those teams and systems to focus on what it is that they do best. Now with PowerPlan, these systems are more valuable. Now I've told you a little about PowerPlan, let's get into the questions and hear from our panelists, but first we want to hear from you. So Fran, can I pass it over to you to launch our first polling question?
Folks should be able to see the poll on screen now. So yeah, we've got some answers coming in. But about 20 more seconds and then we'll close it off. Okay, a couple more answers. All right, we'll stop the poll right here. I'll share the results.
Awesome, thanks, Fran. And this will be helpful then for everybody today, especially. So with that, let's get into the questions. So those on the phone, we've put together, I think, a really good bunch of questions in our fireside chat today to talk about really what it is that we're seeing within the space. So we'll start first with James, and then we're going to go through the rest of our partners. So James, how should finance teams think about their technology strategy as they look to modernize and transform their business?
Thanks, Richard. I think there's really two key things to think about. The first is really streamlining your core business processes around what truly matters. And what this really comes down to is over the last 20 years, we've developed a lot of Band-Aids. We've tried to make systems fit requirements. Really, it's about taking that step back and saying, hey, let's eliminate the customizations that we've been forced to do that. Let's find the right tool to do the job. Let's not put requirements where they belong. Let's take accounting out of our field systems and let's try and let our ERP systems really do what they do best rather than try and manage work. The second thing that I think about is actually going out and taking a look at the technology that's available and working with the partners that are out there that deal with that every day. We've got some great people, this week that we've worked with, next week as well. And really, where can we leverage technology that we haven't in the past? That may mean automation tools, that may mean analytics tools, but that can even be something as simple as, what am I doing manually? Am I manually entering in work orders from one system to another? Am I manually reviewing pick lists for the assets that I'm being put in service? And are there opportunities to automate it?
Excellent, thanks, James. Maybe Francis Marino, maybe can take a stab at that question. What have you guys been seeing in the space?
Yes, thank you, Richard. A couple of things I like about this questions and putting it in perspective of the poll results where, I think the majority of the audience is in the progress or planning an ERP transformation. This question has the words finance, technology, and strategy. And, depending on the organizations that we go to, finance and technology have different agenda from time to time. What we find, though, is that 75% of those ERP programs that we see in the market are actually driven by the office of the CFO and finance team, because finance understands the value that it can get by the right technology, by simplifying the chart of account, by simplifying our allocation routine, etc. And so, finance plays a big role in driving the transformation and the technology agenda at our clients. As James said, another thing that we see in the market is the tools have multiplied over the years. Right? There's a tool for AP, there's a tool for account recs, there's a tool for X, there's a tool for X. And what I keep telling clients all the time is you got to be leading by your process, right? What is the process outcomes that you want to do? What is important to you? Where do you want to invest in different capabilities? And so those are the type of the conversations that, drive, the outcomes that clients will get from their ERP program, but also the right tools and the roadmap for execution.
Excellent. That's great. Tara, anything else maybe you can add to what Francis was?
Absolutely. I always say in this space, you got to back up even further and think about your rate case strategy. And there's a real opportunity at this point because you may have a real need, and I'm seeing everybody get to the end of kind of the natural useful lives of the original big ERP systems put in place in the late 80s, early 90s. And there's a groundswell of all my clients going in over the next few years. And I think the poll results showed that as well. And that's great. There's a real need, but it only happens if your regulator approves your work case. And so figuring out who's going to present that rate case and how they're going to present it. So what's the use case? What is the items that really will trigger a good, meaningful result versus just the lowest cost option? And having that value prop given to the regulator such that they can say, yes, we get that this is needed. We get that this is helpful. It actually benefits the customers in the long run, and things as simple as that your call center is now more accessible. So things that maybe that was lacking in the process before. So it needs to be a holistic thing. And then I will say, I really resonate with what Francis said. There's so much that are make work projects over the years. And if you think about rate case development, how many hundreds of not thousands of Excels are created to take this piece from this system and this piece from this system. And, oh, we need this from here. And to answer this question from an intervener. And it takes up an incredible amount of finance's time, because finance and regulatory departments are usually one tasked with responding to those questions. And if you can come up with all the things that are time killers, that are value killers, and the finance team can actually help make the organization as a whole better and more efficient. And we have a talent shortage in this space already, so it's not like you're going to have this many more people over the years coming through the pipeline. If your ERP strategy can help modernize your workforce, I think that will be helpful in attracting and retaining talent over the next few years. So I think the strategy of even getting it approved is just as important of picking what you do eventually pick as your ERP system.
Awesome. Okay, great answer. Thank you so much, Tara. Okay, let's jump over to our next question. So this one, what are some of the change management best practices? And James, I'll start with you probably in this one, that we see leading organizations use to ensure efficacy of their transformation program. And I know we've talked about PowerPlan doing a lot of these ERP transformations over the years, but maybe you could take a stab at that one.
Yeah, I think there's really three key parts, and it starts with the top. And, when Fran introduces this from a CFO's perspective, it starts from the top and setting that tone of change management. And that doesn't necessarily mean as an executive sponsor that you're part of every meeting, but it's having that person that you trust and empowering them to kind of be your voice within that room, to say, this is what we're driving forward to. And that focus on the future. It is less about the current business process. It's less around, I can't do this because this is always how I've always done it. It's what do we want this to be? And that kind of goes into the second piece, which is staffing. Oftentimes we'll hear at the very start when people are thinking about these programs, that I can't staff it properly because I can't live without people doing their day jobs. There's certain key individuals that keep my business running. But a better question to almost ask yourself is, how can I operate for the next 20 years if these people aren't designing that system? And then in that same topic of, executing and using the system for the next 20 years, it's how do I get my people as involved as early and often as possible? Oftentimes we think about, oh, this is a massive training endeavor. How am I going to work with my people from that perspective? But really the change management best practice that we've seen is it's less about the training, the classroom perspective, and it's more about the testing and having them be hands-on. The programs that have 100 people, 200 people, maybe not executing every test case, but getting their hands in the system prior to it going live, it gives them a better experience once they're actually in the system. It makes them feel heard and that they're a part of the process. And it also means that you have less gotchas after you go live for something that may have been missed in the middle.
Okay, that's great. Maybe Luke, what are some change management best practices you've seen?
Yeah, thank you. So each of my questions I have, or each of my answers I have a little title for, and the title for my answer here is half days. I'm going to come to it. I'll pick up on James's point around change sponsorship early and often. I was on a program, very successful program, one of the more successful programs I've seen in my career. And the CFO commissioned a team across the entire organization. They described it as the enterprise cross-functional team. So it was 6 functional leaders, and I mean executive level functional leaders, and the leaders from the 5 businesses. And over the course of this program, and these programs, as you know, can take a while. Over the course of this program, this team committed to spend a half day every month. Rest assured, early on, they tried to get out of that meeting, or they certainly tried to make the meeting shorter, but we stuck to it. And every month we'd meet for a full half day and work through all the considerations, all the things that team needed to think about, and then go espouse to the rest of their organization. And I think that enterprise cross-functional team was the bedrock of the success of that finance-led transformation program. Half days.
Interesting. Okay, we'll put that one down. Half days is the key piece.
Yeah.
Tara, what do you know about these half days that Luke's talking about?
Sounds like a great idea. So I'm going to answer it slightly different. I couldn't agree more. You need cross-functional. Without cross-functional, and if you think IT's driving this or just one department's driving this, you are doomed yourself for failure from the very beginning. And ultimately, you do need to identify how it's being used in the organization. And I think more importantly in these things, very successful projects think about how can we use it throughout the organization. So instead of saying, well, it has to be what it's always been, it's those focus groups of, oh, if only the system would do X, or if only I could get this report, or if only, it's all those things that, it's the motivation killers throughout the organization of, oh, it takes me forever to put this together. And in a perfect world, if I could press a button and X would pop out, finding out that. So there's a bit of polling that needs to happen. I don't know what the right term is, but there needs to be that, let's gather the information about what do the actual users want to be. In real life, I can say I've been on the receiving end of a horrible and a grand transformation in my career. So as an auditor, we have audit programs. So it's where I spend my hours every day. And at one point in my career, we had a new one and it was completely done by IT. And they went in a room, it seemed like, and then, a few years later, here's our grand program. I have never been more frustrated with a program in my entire life. And there were so many things you could see the intent, but when you actually went to use it, to the real user, myself, it was infuriating. Switch, a few years later, they decided, okay, everybody hates this, let's move on. And they said, we're going to do it differently this time. And this kind of goes to the half-day concept of they pulled people who were going to be users and put them on secondments for X many weeks or months at a time. And they sat next to a developer every day and actually gave real-time feedback of, well, if I did this, could this happen? Well, I've always wanted this to happen. And then they were getting that feedback in real time. And even today, this program is such that when we want to, if you as a real user, there's a help button at the top. We're going to say, give me your suggestion of how to use this program. And we're seeing real-time updates based on, again, the user. So you've gotten buy-in from day one, because I knew it wasn't just X person in a room that had no clue how I wanted to use it. This was my colleague that was going to have to deal with these frustrations every day as much as myself. And so, yes, getting that buy-in and cross-functional and user-driven view is when the transformation overall program and end result becomes something that is real buy-in and actually useful and creates real change within an organization.
Excellent. Okay, you reminded me something, Tara, and James, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one. But back when we presented to the Electricity Canada Finance and Accounting team back in New Brunswick last summer, and we did we had a topic of ERP best practices transformation, and we were very agnostic to it was SAP or Oracle. But I think that if you can think about that last slide that we had that talked about this is such a big piece of your identity, even for someone that this could happen to you once in a career. Maybe just talk about that a little bit more, because that just kind of popped up when putting the pieces together with what Luke and Tara were talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's really a key thing. And Tara kind of touched on it at the start where, we've sweated our ERP assets for 25, 30 years. These are truly legacy defining projects. When you think about it, you are reimagining and reinventing how your enterprise is going to do business for the next 20, 25 years, how they're going to account for setting the platform that everything else is going to be built upon. So how are we going to adapt to change? And I think the other piece that listening to some of the conversations about, the platforms or the transformations that, Tara and Luke have been a part of, kind of that last slide and something that we didn't touch on is have fun. These are fun projects. They are legacy defining. They are hard work, but you build great relationships. The professional development that you see in people as they go through these and level set and say, hey, I went from here to here, it's really outstanding. So it's not just the people that know today what's going on, it's also who are your future leaders. That really, when you get to the efficacy of the transformation program, how have you set those future leaders up for success to carry your business forward? Where has the torch been passed?
Excellent, thanks. So fun to maybe think about how you can sneak out of those half-day meetings then. Okay, well, before we move on to the next question for the panelists, I just want to make sure everybody remembers the participants here. Take time to go in, and Fran can maybe run it through again on how to submit a question for us to go to when we do end the presentation in a bit. We still have some more questions, of course, for us to go through, but this is the opportunity to throw them in, so thanks for that. All right, let's jump into number 3. So James, we'll come back at you to start again. So with some finance leaders, what do they need to get right in this platform-led finance transformation?
I think the first piece is the actual platforms that they select. It's one thing we often focus on, oh, am I SAP or oh, am I Oracle, am I Workday? What is that key pillar that I'm going to use? But there are so many other business processes and systems that are going to be impacted. What am I potentially going to use for treasury? How am I going to execute work? How am I going to plan my asset investment? And how does all that data flow together? And am I handicapping one system with the requirements of another, where I can buy a system that doesn't? And I use that word buy because as we move to the cloud and these platform-led transformations, really customizations is no longer in vogue. It's how do I do this with best in breed? How do I align my business process to what other people are doing to create scalability? How do I allow for future growth? The other big piece is focusing on the outcomes. And Tara at the start kind of talked about, how do I get my rate case approved to execute these projects? But I think that's a really good example for people to consider is coming out of these projects. How am I going to accelerate or improve my ability to file a rate case? How can I be more strategic? And that's not just to focus on the rate outcomes. That's one example. But when I really step back and say, what are the 10 most important things I need to get right? How can these projects and how can my investment that I'm about to make really move them forward?
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, James. Francis, Marino, why don't you take a shot at this one for us too?
Yeah, I'll jump on this one, Richard. Thanks so much, and I'll kind of extend on what James was talking about there, right? And it's an excellent question. It's very timely. In fact, Francis, my colleague, just recently published an article on this exact topic at LinkedIn. I think it was a week or so ago, right? I suggest that you all seek it out and read it. But as a preview, landing on the platform is important, or platforms for that matter. But sometimes we put too much into a platform solution or the platform selection, if I may say so, right? And but after that part, it's really about driving alignment and accountability. And for us, in our experience here at Accenture, it's really about driving that alignment in 6 key areas, and kind of in this order. And I'll quickly go through them for everybody's benefit. Maybe some questions will come out of it. The first one's around leadership and change, right? We emphasize some of the people aspects, but really we want to make sure that we're nailing the stakeholder groups, the people that are be part of this transformation, this process, and what they're going to be doing. But on top of that, I've also, this project has started with a business case and outcomes, but making sure that we are articulating those very carefully and very clearly, right? We don't just want to build a business case to launch. We want to have a business case to deliver, and outcomes to launch, outcomes to deliver. The second one would be a strategic process focus. So we've mentioned process. And that's always a key part of these programs, is to make sure that we're actually re-engineering and redefining what we mean by process and the work that is. But the part here that we sometimes miss is we want to make sure we're focusing on the work that's being done, not just the process by itself. What work is being done and how we can nail that part and make sure that we're looking at an end-to-end picture, right? The third part is what I would call technology enabled. So you're like, why are we saying this? We've already chosen the platform. ERPs now are and James, you nailed it with the whole cloud-based pieces. They're an evolving capability. This is not just about going live, although that's massively important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying dismiss that. I'm saying on top of the how do I get this system live, what other systems are being impacted, right? What are we doing post-go live? What are we doing around this technology capability and enabling technology for the work that we need to do? 4, data and analytics. We all know data is the new oil, right? We have to make sure we're hitting data and reporting, but we want to make sure we're talking about just about data that can come out of the systems or platforms, but also data in the context of those outcomes, the work we're doing, the reporting we need, almost like flipping the data on its head and starting with the outcomes in mind before we get into the actual solutioning, all with the goal of maximizing ROI. Last thing we want to do is do a bunch of work and not hit the ROI targets that we had for the program. Number 5 and number 6 are more around governance and management. So I'll start with number 5, which is integrating the roadmap. It's, we build roadmaps, we all have project plans, but really what I want to focus on here is around how we're documenting and aligning milestones, not just tasks, events that need to occur. And then, of course, driving that alignment over time. It's one thing to start the project strong, but we need to manage the project strong and finish the project strong. The last one's program governance. And I'm using the word program here and not project for a reason. Programs will be a grouping of projects, right? We want to make sure we're thinking this just beyond just, it's not just a platform, it's the other components we're bringing to it. We want to make sure we have a team that can help integrate these projects, these initiatives, and we want to make sure that we're driving decision-making, right? This is about accountability, this is about outcomes, and I'll leave it at that. If I was to summarize it too, those 6 points are key. Suggest you read the article, but also just let's not lose sight of the people that we have to move through these processes and the outcomes that we want to achieve. We started the program that way, we want to make sure we're finishing the program that way.
Excellent. Thanks, Bruno. Luke, what should some of these finance leaders be looking for?
Yeah, right on. I read this question and I immediately flashed back to one of the most memorable meetings of my career. And so the title for my answer here is Fully, Completely. A number of years ago, we were working on a large-scale transformation program at one of Canada's largest companies. We were about halfway through the program. And I was sitting in the CFO's office. The CFO's pretty somewhat intimidating. I guess I would characterize him as that. And just to preface this comment, he loved cars. And he looked at me and he said halfway through the program, Luke, I feel like I bought a car without an engine. And his point is that we were doing a finance transformation without really integrating the rest of the functions, specifically supply chain. And At the time, we were trying to address some weaknesses, some of them pretty significant around revenue recognition and other items. And we just couldn't get the outcome without properly considering supply chain. And so I think as a finance leader, my point here is we have to think about the entire enterprise and we have to go deep to really understand the integration points. And we have to think about the complete solution, hence fully, completely.
Okay. That's really good. I'm a car guy too. So you kind of got me thinking about something that you said and what James said. Last year, I guess September, we were at SAP in Miami. And then just recently last month, we were at Oracle in Nashville. So at the OUG event and the ASAG event. So of course, to the large ERP systems that are out there. And, you talk about different car parts. These are now a lot of the, other companies that we're seeing out there offering now different technology pieces to help build that, to help, augment the ERP. And I think that's what we're seeing. James, we talked about SAP when we got back and Miami. I think that's what we're seeing now. So many more vendors are now coming out here, coming with best practices where things didn't maybe exist for that ERP 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and this is where technology maybe is taking us.
For sure. And I think, Luke really hit on it with how do we touch all of the other pieces coming out of Miami and Nashville. One of the biggest things I thought of was just how many other systems are existing in that ecosystem. And it comes back to these platforms and really, how do I evaluate it? And having partners like Deloitte, like Accenture, like Capgemini to help go through that and figure out what technology, what platforms are actually going to do that, and how do I not miss these things? How do I bring experts in that are seeing this and have seen some of the pitfalls of previous transformations where there was no engine in the car that was bought? A similar example that I've seen is, we used to have, a donkey pulling a cart. I don't want to, buy a Ferrari, but still have the donkey pulling my Ferrari. It's a really good example of how we end up in these, I'm narrow focused vendor. I am an SAP shop and that's all I'm going to do. And so coming out of those events, seeing here's all the different softwares that bolt in, that connect to SAP and do it natively. Integration used to be a dirty word. It was complex. It was expensive. Now that's the name of the game. People are saying, and coming from the power plant side, this is why we have certified adapters that are repeatable, that are, immediate value to bring to facilitate that leading practice. And I'm seeing some nodding heads. I don't know, Francis, if you want to jump in there a little bit.
No, I like the way how power plant, integrates with ERP programs and so on. And I was just saying, like, yes, the adapter is something I remember working well.
Cool. And I only go to the trade shows just for the swag. So I didn't realize you could talk to these other vendors and find out what they have to. That's great to know. All right, let's jump into our next one. This is a good hot topic, and why we put it towards the end here for in fourth. But we want to hear from everybody, definitely on this topic. And this is one. Bring up Miami again. At the SAP event, and the first event that we were there was like 2:30 was the first one, just Canadian only. The room was packed, and this was the topic, right? So, which field is best for us? We have people talking about brown field, people talking about blue field, people talking about green field. Which is the way to go? So, James, can you start us off on this one, and then we'll go through the room.
For sure, and I think it's always interesting to hear the thoughts on this, because to me, there's almost the psychological aspect, and then there's the execution. And often when we think about, greenfield, we think, oh, that's scary. And there's also the underlying sentiment that everything's broken, and that's not the case. And it becomes really hard to push that greenfield methodology because you're dealing with people who have built this system over 20 years. And so I really coach around it that greenfield methodology isn't where you end up. It's really built to try and question, why am I doing something? is there a better way to do this? Let's put everything on the table and at least take a look at it. And then if there's things that we do really well, if there's processes where we're in the top quartile, if there's differentiators in our business, we don't want to throw those away just because we're changing, our technology platforms. We want to lean into those things. But are there areas where we can improve? That's really where that greenfield first methodology kind of lends itself to a brownfield approach. The opposite side of that is where I think about people kind of taking the blue field of, I'm going to look and see, and I know here's the things that I do really well. There's that you've already taken that step to say, here's what I'm going to save. And you go through the same process. And so if you say I'm going to have blue field, I really actually end up in a brownfield lift and shift type mentality where I don't have the transformation. And it really starts from up top. There is an investment that goes into that greenfield first approach that starts to lean a little blue. But I think, and I throw it to our partners who lead these transformations day in, day out, from a power plant perspective, that greenfield that becomes blue has always delivered the best results.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, James. Tara, can you help us out with which field should we try here?
I think I've somewhat answered the question already, in that we've talked about generational. We don't do these every year. So you can either just say, I'm going to keep life easy in that I don't have to learn something new, but I'm going to keep doing things the way I've always been doing. And I think that's the moment of inflection in the company of, is that the right answer? It might be easy, but there's all this inherent time waste and other inefficiencies that come out of that mentality. Versus, what do we want us to be? What are we going to be doing in the next 10 years? What are we going to be doing in the next 30 years? And what's the best way? So there's temporary pain now, but it's exciting in that we're getting to develop something and create what we want it to be versus what it is, and just we always have to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it. I've been in the utility industry a long time, and there's a lot of hesitancy for change because why would we change? It's always worked. And that's not a criticism. That there is a safety culture, there is a culture of, we don't want to change in part because we've gotten regulatory buy-off. We've gotten all the right people on board. So why do we want to change all those opinions? And that's not a bad thing. But again, where do you want to be? Now, I also agree that you don't need to create everything from scratch, because I think the best examples are when you end up in this beautiful marriage and you get into a blue field scenario, but you got there through the other mentality. So I think it's the mentality mixed with execution that gets you to the best results, and you've got the right people and you've got the right, mentality of, it's okay to change. We might not end up in a place that changes the right answer, but we've talked to all the possibilities out there. We've gone, instead of you sell me your product, I'm going to please sell me on the thing that will get to my needed solution versus just this platform. And so I think that kind of overarching mentality of being okay to look outside your comfort zone is a very wise thing and a wise approach to the process.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe. Francis, Marino?
Yes. We do see all the three cases in the market. I personally, I don't have a preference, but what I tell our clients is the right approach is going to depend on the outcomes that you want to get from your program, right? Are you upgrading your ERP to, reduce your technical debt, because you want to go to cloud, eventually get to AI, in which case, it may be, just a brownfield. Did you grow as an enterprise through M&A over the years, and, you have complex allocations, you have a complex chart of account structure, you have a multiple of subledgers, and, there's significant value in, rethinking accounting from end to end, might lead you to do a greenfield, right? Is there certain areas of the business EAM integration, supply chain, fixed asset, EPM, that, drives, areas strategic that we want to have better capabilities. Then, this is where you're gonna go through what I call a selective transformation, where you will upgrade your platform and looking to transform into high value areas. So I don't like giving the consulting answer, but it really depends on, what is your starting points, where you want to go to, and what are the outcomes that you want to get from your program, and then you go ahead and you build the right roadmap for yourself.
Excellent. Thank you, Francis. Luke?
Yeah. I mean, I think to preface my comment first, I think my opinion is probably tainted by my most recent experiences, right? And so for any of us that have just come out of a brown field or just come out of a blue field, right, that probably is going to sway your perspective. My answer to this question is one field. And so what I mean by that is I think we're all clear on what the objective or the destination is. We all need to get to the end of the field. The end of the field is performance, right? Heightened performance, innovation, optimization, all those great things. And so when I think about getting to the end of the field, getting to that outcome, my thoughts are that there's a way to do it that fits many, not every, but many. And my experience is thinking about it from a brownfield first perspective. So for those of us that are certainly thinking about this in the context of SAP, SAP is sort of forced, if you will, a 2-minute drill on all of us, right? And so we got to get to the end of the field sooner rather than later here. And so the intent of maybe throwing a long pass, that first long pass to get way down the field and thinking about that in the context of a brownfield, right? And then following that up with a set of runs to get us all the way to the end zone. And those runs being selective optimization in key zones and key processes, and think of those as blue fields. That's the way I'm currently encouraged about thinking about what I describe as one field.
Excellent. James?
For sure. And I think one of the things as I listen to the three other panelists talk about, Tara talks about culture, one field, and the outcomes, is really how you get to that point and the importance of a phase 0 or a study phase to really align. And Francis and I have partnered on this, at multiple clients. There's one that, particularly stands out where they really went to the table. And this was a big question of, what does our platform do best within this approach? What are the new platforms that we're bringing to the table or considering bringing to the table do? And then how do we do that? It really didn't become I think this goes to Luke's, answer of, it's not just one approach there. It's how do I get people in up front? And so I'm saying this truly is what the field we're going to play ball on is going to look like in the future. And level setting that from day one is almost as, or probably even more important. I see Francis, nodding his head, just as important as the actual field you're playing on. I don't know, Francis or Luke, if you want to weigh in there at all.
You can go, Luke.
No, hit it, Francis. Hit it.
Okay.
You go first.
No, well, it's back to what I want to say. Like, what are the outcomes that you're driving to? And, what is the roadmap and journey to go there, and how we minimize risk along the way?
Yeah, and I think I just go back to, what's your horizon? And so for those of us that are in truncated horizons, not maybe of our own accord, right? That shifts or pivots how you think about the answer to this question. And so, I think right now we're in a place where these things are hyper complicated, right? They're complex. They're always more complex than you ever envisioned. And so simplicity rules the day right now, especially on compressed timelines. And so, how do you really think hard about doability and use that as an outsized lever in your decision?
For sure. And one of the other things I think of when I look at the audience that's here, and Tara, I think this goes to you from an audit perspective. with these outcomes and the risk-based approach, are there any considerations from an audit perspective on the back end that people might want to think about when they're considering blue field, ground field, brown field?
Yes. So one of the things I've seen when system implementation has gone really well is you've involved your internal audit team from day one. I know that's not a sexy thing to think about, bringing internal audit, but they already have a view of how all these interconnections are existing within the organization. As an auditor, I often see the entire organization because I see, here's how the inventory management system flows in here, and here's how the purchase order system works. And you're seeing all these interconnections, which very few other parts of the organization see that holistic picture. And so you also need to think about, okay, yes, that might be the best system ever, but it has these inherent security flaws, or it has these inherent things that an auditor might care about, which might ultimately have a result from a internal controls perspective. So figuring out where those pain points are, and it's not just pain points, it's, I'd say, maybe some system quirks. And we've seen over the years, if we go back a long time, you had all these mainframe projects where everybody just built it from scratch. We're going to code it from scratch. We're going to customize it from scratch. And then there's maybe one guy in the back room who actually understands the coding of the system. Now you can customize it to this day any way you can, but to audit it and to make sure that changes happen timely and in accordance with the policies that you have, they're a nightmare. So understanding how that, I think Luke's comment about simplicity, what's the simplest way? Sometimes that may drive the decision, and sometimes brownfield is the right answer. From that thing is, how can we keep a very simplistic, uncomplicated control structure? And again, that's going to be a system by system decision, but there you do need to talk not only to your internal auditors, but your external auditors often have a great deal of insight of where some of these past pain points are, even from a system perspective, that when you're making these decisions go forward, you can make some really good choices that will ease the organization from not just the tactical day-to-day, but from a control consideration.
Thank you so much, Tara. And you thought about a topic that I think we're going to have for our second webinar series, which will be on the 10th. We'll talk about that guy in the back room when he retires, and then what do you do? So panelists, thank you guys so much today for joining us for our first conversation series, Electricity Canada. Fran, can we pass it over to you to kind of help us bring through? And again, to the participants joining, thank you again as well for you joining. Fran, maybe mention again how to send in some Q&As, and if we do have some questions, we'd love to tackle those right now.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and thanks to our panelists. That was really insightful discussion, about all those topics. So we will open it up to questions. Again, a reminder, we have the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if anything comes to mind, we have about 10 minutes or so. Be happy to answer those questions, ask those questions of our panelists here. Just to maybe start things off here, Richard, and you can direct this to any one of our experts. What are the benefits of an ERP transformation, and what are the key value levers?
Okay, James, you want to talk about maybe the key value levers? Is that what it is?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so James.
I think to me there's two pieces. One is regulatory outcomes and compliance. One of the things I hear, coast to coast, is everyone hates the regulatory process. It's painful, it's time consuming. We're being asked to do more with less. And that's in the construct of massive growth in investment. 1.5x, 2x, 3x what we're used to spending is what people are going in and asking for. And so how do I manage that? And how do I report back on it? It's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to submit an approval for my technology project, for my ERP transformation. But it was mentioned earlier in the conversation, the ROI. How do I actually record against that? How do I answer intervener requests? When I look at infrastructure growth and the investment that's going to be there versus system maintenance and modernization, how do I balance those pieces? Commercial versus residential, and how do I track that investment? I think we're seeing a lot of capital tracker type approaches coming in, and how do I facilitate that end to end? And really that's the second piece, is that end to end process. that should be central to the testing people they're doing. That should be central to the design, central to how we're thinking about it. I think, every question there was kind of an undertone to that, is you can't operate in a silo from a process perspective, from a partner perspective. You really become one team, one system, and that's hugely important.
Excellent. Maybe Marino, Francis,
Yeah.
what are some of these levers maybe that you're seeing?
Yeah, I'll jump on this, Rich, and I'll take a bit of a cynical approach here, not to be negative, but just to kind of flavor it a bit, right? The word value is in kind of being influenced. Luke's point about the whole brownfield, greenfield, bluefield piece as well, right? And the reason I'm saying this is because your last experience, your most recent experiences kind of get you to your next one. There is like a formal answer you want to see here, but I'll hit back on James, you hit a bit as well, the underlying themes, but also what I mentioned before about, don't lose sight of the people and the outcomes here, right? The people that are going to be participating, leading this process, these programs are going to influence a lot of what we mean by value, right? And the reason I said cynical, because sometimes these projects are now launched, these ERP transformations are launched simply because I need to move to the next version, right? And that's the value prop, simple as that. I know we sometimes color around the edges around what it is, but it really just goes down to I need to move off of what I'm on now into something new. And what I would challenge our people here is to think beyond that and think as to, what are the outcomes again? What are we trying to achieve? And even if your business case is as simple as I need to move from old to new, two real areas that you definitely want to think about documenting and putting ideas around what your value levers are going to be, because this is what's going to make your program survive past go live. This is what's going to drive you to that performance agenda. One, of course, is the table stakes. We all have in finances. How are we optimizing operations, right? What's that baseline value? What are we doing around cost efficiency? What are we doing around, improving operations, not finance operations, but business operations? What are we doing around improving compliance and control? What are we doing around documenting the gains in sustainable operations and the resiliency of our services? How do we de-risk our platforms? The other theme that I think you need to put some answers around is how we are accelerating growth. Now, that's a consulting term. James, I said it before, the ROI, and you nailed it again, right? It's okay. So we're bringing these new technologies, right? We're bringing these new processes. We're upskilling our people. So what are we doing? One of the things we did it for is, of course, is speed and agility, right? So can we do things faster and more nimbly? Right? Let's measure that. Let's talk about how we're able to move things at speed, how we're able to be more agile, how we're able to iterate. Let's talk about what we're doing around data, right? And what we're doing around reporting and how we're able to do AI better than we did before. Data is a foundational component of AI. And if we have crappy data from before, right? We got to talk about how we're modernizing that and how that's going to impact what we do as a business, right? Which ties me to that another part. Everybody in this space is getting more customer centric. What are we doing for our customers? What are we doing around talent? What are we doing around our partners? Data and reporting are going to help you with that. And then got to hit it again is that last part, I think, is just insight. I'm a performance management person. I've been doing that for years, right? So I always think about how am I taking data and putting to reports? How am I having a meeting generate ideas? And how do I want to bring data those ideas? So, a lot of consulting terms there, but basically what I'm getting at is if we can start identifying, what are we doing around optimization? What are we doing around growth initiatives? And documenting that. Maybe it didn't go in our business case, but as professionals here, we want to make sure we're capturing that, because that's what's going to make us nail these programs, nail the afterlife of these programs. And if I'm honest with us, considering how long these things take, remind ourselves as to why we wanted to do the project to begin with. Right? You get lost in the weeds a year into this going, it just turns into the go live project. I hope that we can avoid it becoming a go live project and actually being an outcome-based project.
Thank you, Maria. Tara, what are you seeing on some of these key levers?
I think thematically, it's been hit on and said various ways, and I've even said it without using those terms. Figuring out what you want your end result and what your get user buy-in, which is the cultural buy-in, which is those things you can't necessarily put a number on, but it is breaking whether the users see it as a value, and because they're going to be using it for the next 30 years. Another thing to think about, and this is kind of a very wonky accounting intersection with this industry, is there's sometimes these very difficult decisions of, do we go cloud or on-prem solely based on the accounting treatment? And that's because what you need to get it capitalized to get your recovery in a regulated industry for this to all be meaningful to you. And working with your finance team to think through that, because there are ways to get recovery of a cloud-based system, but really stepping back and saying, okay, that's not a barrier to entry. And so again, that doesn't become one of the things to even worry about. And there is strategies that you can get there. It also helps to say, I'd say it's that art of the possible versus just static. What are we doing today? And that applies to probably every area of this process.
Awesome. Thank you, Tara. Luke, we bring that question over to you.
Yeah, right on. My two-word title to my answer here is live track. And so if you thought about from the time you start the business case to the time you're done one of these programs, and I think this was alluded to, it's years. And so when you built the business case 2 years ago to do this transformation, 3 years ago to do this transformation, you didn't understand, we didn't even know really what AI was. We didn't really understand the EV adoption rate and what that was going to do to our business models. There were so many things we didn't understand. And so I think it's critical over the course of any of these programs is to recognize that the levers are going to change, that the proportion on those levers is going to adjust, and you need to be tracking it regularly, monthly, to understand where's the business case today, how does it adjust, what do we expect to realize, how will we realize it, and how will it shift? Because the answer is way different than the answer you considered when you started the business case.
Okay, James?
For sure. And I think one of the things, and I think Francis, you kind of started, and Tara really hit on it on like the capitalization approach and there being different interpretations. And that really kind of triggered for me one of the key levers. And we've kind of talked about it, but I think about a good example is field and finance. How do I leverage, again, back to that lever word, my field data to support finance? How do I turn finance into a strategic business partner for the field without creating hangups, without creating, needless touch points? How do I automate that? The conversation, the touch on, AI. Are there areas where I can, AI is the big buzzword, but is there even, something we can do that prevents picking up the phone call? I talked about, someone manually going through a pick list today. Is there a way that I can categorize my major material and have that drive the assets that I'm putting in service? Am I, manually picking up the phone to phone someone to say, hey, this work's been in service for a year and no one's figured it out? I'm behind 18 months in my mapping because I don't have all my charges collected. Things like that, back to the outcomes type approach of how do I set up, and where when the business case changes, what were the North Stars? And if one of the North Stars was eliminating that field to finance friction, how does my business case shift? But how do I stay on that course? How do I say this must be better? And that's a huge thing for people to figure out, I think. And, executive sponsorship around that, driving towards those key pillars.
That's great, James.
Awesome. Thank you very much for those answers. I will say we are at 2 minutes to the end, so we'll close there. But I'd like to thank everybody for their participation today. Richard, thank you for moderating. I appreciate you driving the bus here and everybody's insights. I think that was very helpful. This webinar will be uploaded to electricity.ca. So feel free if you'd like to go back and rewatch. Next week, I'd like to prepare everybody for part 2 of this session with experts from EY, KPMG, and PwC. So for more insights and perspectives, please feel free to join again Thursday, April the 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And all of our future events and webinars can be found in our monthly newsletter on current affairs, which is goes out at the top of the month, or on our event section on our website at electricity.ca. Final word, Richard?
Looking forward to seeing everybody for the next event next week. It's going to be as engaging as today's, with different questions as well. And I'm probably going to think about bringing some other pieces of the puzzle to next week's conversation. So, Fran, thank you to you and the Electricity Canada team for setting this up for today, and to the panelists that joined. Thank you all, and have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody. Take care.